Shalom, welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Chabad House of Delmar, together with my co-host Mark Ronich of Statewide News Service, jbiztechphilly.com, and now columnist for the Jewish Press.
And I'm having a lot of fun with all three assignments, Rabbi. I have a column in the Jewish Press called Albany Beat, and I talk about how government relates to the Jewish community or doesn't, as the case may be. Yeah. Now, something that's very important to the Jewish community is building and regulatory compliance, because we do have a lot of landlords who are Jewish. But with us today is Robert Magee, and he's the commissioner of Director of the Buildings and Regulatory Compliance for the City of Albany. So welcome to the Jewish View.
Well, thank you for having me.
Happy to have you here. So tell us a little bit about your job first, and what your office does.
Yeah, as the Director of Buildings and Regulatory Compliance, our job is to enforce the New York State Uniform Building and Fire Code, as well as the Albany City Code throughout the City of Albany. We really do that in two different ways. First, we have our code enforcement officers, and those are the people who go out and make sure that people are maintaining their properties up to code. So if we see a building that's falling apart, broken windows, we receive complaints. The code enforcement officer is the one that goes out, addresses those complaints, contacts the building owner, and gets them to make necessary repairs or just otherwise bring the property into compliance. And then on the other side, we have our building inspectors, and they oversee all new construction in the city, as well as major rehabs and repairs. And the way they work is, someone looks to do a project, they come in, they apply for a building permit, our building inspector will go over the plans with them, they approve the building permit, and then while the project is going on, they do a series of inspections and ultimately close it.
I have a question to Mark. Even though I live in Delmar, which is the town of Bethlehem, but I would assume it's very general, of the same kind of codes, give or take. Mm-hmm. And we just bought a new center. Mm-hmm. So they say, now, once you changed hands, went from nonprofit to nonprofit, but we're going to check if the oil, the oil tanks are leaking or not. They had to pull them out. If you thought they were leaking, why didn't you inspect them before? Why is it changing hands? All of a sudden they got done. I mean, no, there wasn't a leak, thank God. But, I'm just saying, if there was a problem, why don't you say a yearly inspection or every 5 years? Because you waited 20 years and now it's your hand. Now we're going to check it out.
Yeah, that does happen. I mean, the law does require periodic inspections. So for instance, in order to rent property in the city, you have to apply for a residential occupancy permit. So that has us in residential buildings every 2.5 years or so to do an inspection. So we catch things like that before they become a major repair.
Like private home ownership?
Private homeowners, yes.
You haven't come to my house in 30 years, 25 years.
Mark, what do you
So I'm not going to tell you where I live, but you have,
It's for residential properties.
Right, and I have a residential.
I'm sorry, that are being rented.
Rented. You had some
So if
rental property.
I just thought it was for a private homeowner.
No. And you'll see in the New York State Uniform Code, which is a code that applies everywhere, Delmar, Albany, Suffolk County, the whole nine. There are a lot of exceptions made for single family owner-occupied homes. You'll find that in there. But going back to those periodic inspections, there are periodic inspections that are required by law. As far as oil tanks go, I don't know.
Or multi-dwelling.
For multi-dwellings, for large assembly spaces, things like that.
Okay. So one of your biggest challenges in the city are called zombie properties. Now I guess you don't always know who the landlord is or who the property owner is.
Yeah.
And I can't figure out for the life of me how you don't know who the property owner is. Because, you get a deed. The clerk, and what happens? Why don't you know?
Well, it's actually not an issue of knowing who the property is, who the property owner is. So the zombie properties applies to a very specific situation where a property has been foreclosed on, and then the owner has now walked away. But then the bank that has foreclosed on the property actually doesn't move forward with the foreclosure and take control over the property.
Nobody wants it.
Exactly. So you can find the owner, and the owner will have left the country, they'll moved out of town, they're just simply hard to find. And then sometimes if you do find them, they'd say, well, I don't own that property anymore. They insist that they're not, and they refuse to take responsibility for it.
And they're allowed to?
Not technically, but just practically. Exactly, exactly. There are buildings in the city where that's happened. And if the owner is now in Florida,
and you
California,
can't extradite them to come back and arrest them?
I think practically it would be extremely difficult.
It's more than a misdemeanor, or is it a felony?
It's
to
a
do that?
misdemeanor.
It's a misdemeanor?
Yeah, don't quote me on that, but yeah, it's.
No, you
it's-
just quoted yourself.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But, so that's why, unless, if it was a felony, maybe it would be brought up and made more of a serious crime. You're not going to advocate for that, are you?
No, I believe in working with people who can to bring properties into compliance without necessarily bringing it into
What do
court.
they do with the zombie property? Just sell it on auction and saying, listen, if you're
No,
going...
now it's not auction anymore. Now it's the land bank, right?
Tell us what that is.
Well, the land bank it's actually an entity established through the county government. And what they'll do is they take buildings that the county has foreclosed on, usually through tax foreclosure, that's when the county forecloses on properties. And instead of simply putting those properties up for auction, selling them to the lowest bidder, which created situations where people were not maintaining properties that they just simply invested in, they bought sight unseen. They find owners who are going to put the time and care into a building that is needed to keep it, habitable, and to keep it from falling into disrepair. So that's, again, a very specific subset of those kind of vacant buildings / zombie properties,
Right.
ones where county taxes haven't been paid and the county's foreclosed on them.
So, so the city foreclosing on the property is just because it was abandoned, vacated?
The city does not generally foreclose on
Foreclose.
properties.
It's the county that forecloses,
Yes.
and then what, you are left to deal with it, or?
Well, we will cite the owner. So, for instance, even with the zombie property situation, you do have zombie properties where the owner's still available. They've moved across town. In those cases, we bring them into court, or we notify them, they step up and take responsibility, or we go to court and we, see that a fine's imposed.
Or they could just sell it. I mean,
They
if
could sell
get
it.
rid of it over here, then sell it in an auction.
But there
yourself.
really is a lot of people who have this idea that they could flip properties because they see it on TV and they make it like within a half hour, you got the condensed version and
Yeah.
say, wow, I could do this. And they go ahead and they buy an inexpensive property maybe for $30,000, $20,000. And then they find that it's more difficult than it's worth.
Yeah, you see that happen
Yeah.
very often, and that was a big problem with the auctions. People would buy the building sight unseen. They would open the door after having purchased it for $1,000 and see that it's going to cost $250,000, $300,000 just to bring it up to a place where it's habitable again.
And
the
then
stickers,
it's not worth it.
Exactly.
And then it still can't sell for that amount.
Yeah,
no
the
matter how long
economics-
the economics just don't work.
Well, ultimately, can't you just knock down a house? I mean, if it's worthless, then
Now you got another topic here.
Yeah.
Because
Just
there's
one.
a demolition project and program that's going on in the city. And it costs like $130,000 for
knock
the
down
city
one?
to knock down a house?
No, it typically costs about $30,000.
38,200. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's the
There it
average.
is.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Well, there's
I
no.
put a 1 in front of it. 100,000 here or there, okay.
Yeah, well, there's no concerted program to do demolitions. The way we do, we order an emergency demolition is a property comes to our attention and we take a look at it. Now, we're not engineers. We get certified through the state to enforce the code. So we know what the codes are. We know how to identify particular code violations, but we're not necessarily engineers. But we see a building where we think it might pose a danger to the public. And then at that point, we hire a third-party engineer. And the third-party engineer comes in. They do a full evaluation of the building, again, on very short notice because because of the risk posed by a lot of these buildings to the public.
Go ahead, and go ahead.
Yeah, so they come in, they conduct a review. If they make a determination that the building's an imminent threat to public safety, at that point, we would order a demolition. Now, sometimes it can, and actually.
who's going to pay for it, though? $38,000, that's
Taxpayer.
not nothing. It's going to be the city just going to come in and pay the money.
Well, the cost of the demolition is billed to the owner. If the owner doesn't pay it, it goes on their property tax levy.
Yeah, but they're done, they're out. They're not,
Yeah,
In some cases,
they
that's
wash their hands of it.
in some cases that's true, but in a lot of
So
cases,
then the city's stuck with the bill.
well, it goes in the property taxes, and the county they
new
make
owner-
the property
And the
taxes.
new owner is
whole.
going to have to pay that? I mean, then it becomes like, well, you have a vacant lot. So
Mm-hmm.
if you want, the vacant lot, well, here's the price, but $38,000
It could potentially, yeah, that could
Part
be
of
the
it.
case if you have taxes.
You know,
on-
one lot that I'm just more familiar with is, because I knew the old owner, he may rest in peace, Bernie Saul, which is right on Hudson. It's still standing, but right next to it, they had to knock it down on Hudson.
It's the oldest building in the city
yeah,
of
yeah,
Albany.
50
That's-
Hudson.
That's
There
the
was a-
Saul,
Yeah, there was a gentleman from the Jewish community, Bernie Saul, who owned that.
Oh, okay.
And his name, Saul name, is on the side of the building and stuff.
Oh,
But
okay.
next door,
Yeah.
they had to knock it down, they said, and that's,
And they had to make sure
Yeah.
that the Saul building was structurally sound, that they didn't knock down the building next to it, and then have this historic building from the 1600s
Yeah.
fall also, so
Yeah, that was a very,
tricky.
that was a tricky time, and it was a tricky project, and the Albany Convention Center Authority owned the building that had actually collapsed, and this is an example of a demolition where the person who owned the building actually had, they paid for it directly, so they did a lot of work, and yeah, we were able to save the building.
Now,
which is-
you
which is
talk
great.
about engineers, calling engineers, and what type, and I didn't want to interrupt you for this, but
Sure.
what type of companies are engineering companies around here that you might use?
I don't have the full list in front
Like,
of me,
no,
but
like one or two examples.
we have Curzon Architects. They handled the Hudson Ave demolitions, and we have honestly
Hirschberg
Chazen-
and Hirschberg, are they one of, no?
No, they're not on there. You
They're-
see, to get on the list, you apply, and you have to be, to be on the list, you have to be willing to show up on site, within, pretty much immediately as soon as you
Now,
get the call. So.
Curzon is an interesting story because his father was one of the primary movers and shakers for where the Albany Jewish Community Center is. And they have the Curzon,
Oh, okay.
they named one of the rooms after him, or pool or something. And they, so anyway, that's his son who's the architect.
Okay.
And now you have Bernie Saul, who's a member of the Jewish community, who was right next door. So it's kind of a nice, warm Jewish story, 6 degrees of separation type
do
thing.
you feel that they should keep that Bernie Saul property? It looks so run down, it just almost, I mean, historic, it looks like an eyesore, if anything.
Well, was that the Mission building, or was that
Yeah.
the one knocked down?
That was the one that
knocked down.
collapsed,
This
yeah.
was, are you going to make this into, do you think the city has plans to make this into a visitor center of some sort? Or?
Well, the building is owned by the Historic Albany Foundation, so
Yeah.
ultimately whatever happens to the building is up to them.
Who's run by a Jewish woman,
Oh, is it?
Holland, Susan
Oh, okay.
Holland.
Yes.
And so she was on the show. I'm making, this should be
Yeah.
called the Jewish Connection, not the Jewish View, but it's okay.
Yeah, and Historic Albany, they do great work.
Yeah, yeah.
And I know we did work with them after the demolition because they had to seal the building.
Right.
And they came to us for a permit, and we worked through that process with them.
You
so.
know, they bought it from the Saul family?
I-
Why? Because it was Bernie Saul's property, and then they just bought it? That's what happened.
I suppose so. Might have been before my time.
You guys, Bernie Saul was also a painter around in his later years, and he would go around and do odd jobs or whatever. But there was a TV commercial that used the Inspector Clouseau from the Pink Panther, and he looked a lot like Inspector Clouseau from the movie series and from Peter Sellers. Okay, so they put the hat on him and they put the coat on him, and he went around in this commercial that went on for many years. And he's probably better known as Inspector Clouseau's twin than he is than anything else. But he was a gentleman. He was a great guy, and we just called the Bernie Saul building.
And what if they ever make a convention center there? They're going to have to work around that whole building?
Yeah, they would have to work around it. I can't speculate
Yeah,
on what would
I-
happen in the future. I would love to see that building brought up to code to be made safe again. And I think a visitor center is a great idea. But I know that Historic Albany, I'll defer to them on what they're doing, but I know they're partnering with a number of different entities who are applying for grants. So hopefully that building has a bright future.
And there was a home on North Lake Ave, 66 North Lake Avenue, that was demolished. There was a big thing in the paper. It was about the demolition, and that was something that you had shepherded through, I guess. That was one of your first. So what happened with? I mean, it's just an empty lot now. I mean, is there going to be a garden, made a community garden? I mean, what are they doing with it?
Yeah. Well, I believe the lot is owned now by the county. And it had been, that property had actually just been purchased by the county at the time. But as far as what the plans are for it,
You don't know.
that would be up to,
It's beyond your pay grade. That's
Yeah,
it. You moved
I
on.
enforced the code.
You just made sure that it was leveled and then you
Safe,
moved on.
and, yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
What is your biggest problem in your job right now?
Well, our biggest project that we're working on right now is actually implementation of our new code enforcement software. That's something that the department had been working on for a long time. I've spent a good amount of time getting that process, reinvigorated, and everyone in the office is kind of on board to checking how the new system is going to work and everything else. But we are on track to go live with the new code enforcement software in the third week of January. That software is going to realize just an endless number of efficiencies within our office.
Such as what?
Our record keeping right now is very balkanized. So we have all our code enforcement information is in one kind of very old, antiquated system that's difficult to access. So if you were to ask me what's the status of a particular property, it would take me 2 or 3 minutes just going through this one program to figure out what we had done there recently, what needed to happen, so on and so forth. Meanwhile, our building permits are in a whole other database. And then, we have licenses, we manage licensing for plumbers and electricians and for, our elevator inspections, and those are something that need to happen, on a periodic basis. They're all in different places. This is going to put that all under one roof. It's going to allow us to, if we have a particular developer who's doing a number of projects in the city, we're going to be able to enter that developer's name. We're going to see everything that they're working on. So it'll allow us to identify kind of systemic problems so that we can be more efficient in how we address things. It's also going to allow our code enforcement officers to actually update our system immediately from the field using an iPad. Right now, they go out there with pen and paper. They look at they look at a code violation. They take notes. They come back to the office. They have to enter information into that system I was just talking about. It takes a ton of time. So this way, they're going to be able to do that immediately, and it's going to save a huge amount of time.
Could they do it from their car?
Mm-hmm. They can do it right from the iPad.
Right in their, they can sit in the car like the police department sits in their car, and they don't have to go back to the office, and they can also do all their work. It's sort of like a mobile office.
Exactly. And they would have to spend a lot less time at the office. And that'll free them up too to be more proactive, which is one of the big focuses that we're trying to
Where is
work
your
on.
office located?
200 Henry Johnson Boulevard.
And where was it located before that?
We were at City Hall, the third floor.
Third floor.
Shortly after I started, we implemented the one-stop shop initiative, which Mayor Sheehan had shepherded through. And that put us in the same offices as the planning department. And that, again, allowed us to realize a lot of efficiencies because we do a lot of work with the planning department. A lot of our permits have to be approved by them. So we have a lot of questions for them. And this way, instead of having to work through inter-office mail, we can just walk across the office, ask the question to the appropriate person.
Well, is planning still up on the third floor?
No, planning is now at 200 Henry
200,
Johnson.
okay.
Exactly, yeah.
So what happened, did something happen structurally with City Hall that you had to move, or?
No, this is just a kind of one of those kind of common sense solutions that's Mayor.
So let me ask you
Sure.
something. Is City Hall, the building City Hall, up to code? No, it's true. Go ahead.
I have not done a review of it, but it's, with when you're dealing with historic structures, a lot of the code is, it recognizes the fact that buildings were, they were built before the code was implemented. Right. And obviously with City Hall, it's a, I don't know the exact number of years, how old it is, but
1684 or something like 1600.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It says it on the poster, right? No, just right behind you. No.
Yeah. Well, the building itself, I think, was late 1800s, if I want to say 1880. But they.
It goes the other way also. Again, using my experience, I'm not a building inspector to say the very least. But again, we bought a very iconic building in Bethlehem. Maybe you know it, the Adams House with the 6 pillars. And, again, we had to have inspected when we just bought it, literally a month ago, 2 months ago maybe now. And It's made in 1836, so you start thinking.
Yeah, right.
And the engineers came in and said, no, this is a solid building. You could see the rocks there. So on the contrary, in a way.
They don't make them like they used to.
Yeah, sometimes these older, is that what you see? I mean, you're the engineer, I'm just,
Well,
an observer. But, you would think, I know my parents moved from Chicago to Florida. So they went into new condos, but they were still making them, so you could see how they were being made.
Yeah.
And he says, oh man, you put up this plywood and they're tacking this, this new stuff.
Sheet
But
rock.
one hurricane's gonna come and blow this
Yeah.
thing to like a stack of cards. So, like an old building with real stones and real craftsmanship, like the Capitol. How are you gonna
Right.
build a Capitol today?
Yeah.
I'm just saying, engineering is that to hold water, like what I'm saying? I mean, that the old buildings are more solid than in a way, than a new
we
construction.
should say that you're an attorney, not an engineer.
Yes,
Really?
I'm not
Oh,
an
I'm
engineer. I was about
sorry.
to say that.
Okay.
I don't want to give anyone the wrong impression.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, those buildings were built to last, and City Hall's.
So,
Yeah.
because there's a crane in front of City Hall right now, and I understand there was leaking from the roof and to the fourth floor, and they had to clear out the fourth floor, and
Yes.
I mean, it's a mess up there. And that's why I was wondering, why aren't you doing a code enforcement inspection?
Well, the buildings within the city are managed by the city engineer. So the city engineer's trained in code enforcement, so it's, they ensure things are up
Well,
to code.
compliance, so whatever falls under your purview, why don't you look at the building and see what's happening, or to make it, to get ahead of the curve, so that we don't just have a perpetual crane taking, putting on a new roof, all the time,
Well, that is something that the city engineer does.
Okay.
So that's, we essentially be doing the city engineer's job, and, we have a lot of work to do
Okay.
on our own. So that's the reason why.
Are you a historian? Does the historic buildings really mean something to you?
I'm a lover of history. It's something that I've been raised with, and I have a profound respect for it. And that's why it was, with the 48 Hudson
Yeah.
situation, it was very rewarding to be able to shore up that building. And I think in a lot of ways, 48 Hudson is probably, stronger now than it was beforehand, because we were able to do all of that
Really?
support work within the inside.
Now, like I said, you're an attorney, you graduated from Albany Law School.
I did.
But you also did something with Touro Law School. See, Patty Salkin, who was at Touro, used to be
Yes.
the dean at Albany Law, and now she's the dean at Touro.
Yes.
So-
I'm not sure if Professor Salkin was ever dean at Albany Law School.
Oh.
She was head of the Government Law Center, I want to say.
Government Law Center,
Yeah.
okay.
So she went to Touro, I suppose, a year after I graduated. But
Jewish also. Okay. Another connection.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
But
Touro is a Jewish.
Touro is too.
It is, yeah. So, yeah, my connection with Touro Law School is that, my second year of law school, I wrote an article as part of my being on the Albany Government Law Review, which was the publication of the Government Law Center, which
Yes.
Professor Salkin oversaw. I submitted that article to the Touro Law Review. And it was
Now,
pretty-
the article was called "The Trial, the Bench, the Net, and the First Amendment: The Possibilities of Reform in the New York State Judicial Elections."
Yeah.
Now, this was I know that you just told me it was a combined effort of several authors, but there's over 1,000 pages of this whole document. So I couldn't really get to all of it.
Right.
But I did get to some key parts that you wrote. So, I mean, you feel that there still needs to be reform in the state judicial elections? I mean, do you still feel there needs to be?
Well, the article wasn't necessarily, again, it was a
Well,
long
the
time.
title, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm going by the title, that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, yeah. The article is, again, about taking sort of a fresh look at how we do judicial elections in New York State and how
Right.
we might improve things. I looked at the judicial qualification committees and, again, just how elections were done in other states, and kind of proposed things that we could possibly do within New York State if, leaders felt that was.
Now, again, this was done 7 years ago, and you've had a lot of things
It's
in
a lot of-
between.
yeah.
So I understand that it's not 100%. How old are you?
32.
32? Well, you should still remember this, I'm sorry. At
Yeah,
that age,
no,
no. But I digress. But we used to elect the Court of Appeals,
Mhm.
and then in the 70s, I guess, we decided not to.
Mhm.
So and now they're appointed. You think that's a better system?
I can't speak to that.
No? Okay.
Yeah, like I said, I wrote this article.
Now,
I never
a lot
developed
of our-
expertise beyond that.
A lot of our judges are cross-endorsed. Like, we just had a Supreme Court election in this 10-county district here,
Mhm.
and there were only 2 people on the ballot for 2 positions.
Mhm.
I mean, there was like no contest.
Mhm.
And I just thought, I didn't know what your personal thoughts were about this, because now we're not talking about your job, we're talking about something else.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
just
yeah.
a passion for you,
Yeah, it was writing the article was very engrossing, and I had a great time writing it. A lot of things happened, and I think in particular there was a Supreme Court decision that was, that changed that would have changed a lot of the conclusions I made there. And I discussed that decision in the
Judge Kennedy wrote the decision. Justice Kennedy?
Yes, that was, I think you're referring to the case that the case that was decided after this was published was kind of reviewing. And of course, I believe, and that the outcome of that, what was at issue in that court case that went to the Supreme Court was whether or not a judge who had been elected to, I forget the state, but it was their version of the Court of Appeals, the highest court in the state, was required to recuse themselves where a case of someone who had donated a substantial amount of money to their campaign came before the court. And the Supreme Court ruled, and I was somewhat surprised by this, that the judge would have to recuse themselves. And again, that came out after. So,
But I think that was the argument of why judges are not, Court of Appeals judges are not campaigning anymore. Because then these decisions would have to come to them as the final court in the state, and they didn't want to have to deal with, this is the guy who helped me my campaign.
Yeah.
So now they're appointed, I think, we were ahead of the curve in New York State, I think, for that U.S. Supreme Court ruling.
Yeah. Well, the big concern, I think, with any, judicial, the act of being a judge, is just the appearance of being impartial.
Yeah.
And so if you have someone in front of you who's maybe responsible for you being there, obviously that's going to create problems.
It says here in the conclusion that the compelling state interest in preventing party bias unique to judicial elections allows campaign regulations and practices that might be unconstitutional in legislative or electoral elections. So, there's a culture that they say, could be developing, that if you keep electing judges and they have to campaign and they have to raise money, that it's inherently creating conflicts of interest.
It could.
Yeah. So, just by the fact of what they're doing. So
your case went before the Supreme Court?
No, it was a decision.
Yeah,
It
was
just a paper that he wrote.
Yeah.
But I found it fascinating, and I just wanted to bring it up because I found this extremely engaging. And now you also worked as the Legal Aid Society lawyer.
I did, yeah.
And how was that experience?
I loved the Legal Aid Society. What I did for them is I managed our housing, our housing defense grant.
Foreclosure,
I did foreclosure
For City of Albany?
For actually Columbia Green, and then later on Rensselaer County. I did eviction defense.
But you were located on Colvin?
Yeah, I was located on Colvin. Yep. And my foreclosure work kind of took me out to Fulton County, Schoharie. But yeah, that's where I got to see a lot of a lot of residential dwellings. As part of the grant that I managed, I actually had to do inspections of my clients' buildings to make sure that they were safe and habitable and everything.
It's interesting. My son's a lawyer in New York, but I always asked him legal aid. I didn't know legal aid lawyers. And, I was thinking, no offense, but, I thought, well, if you can't get a regular job, you go for legal aid. He says, no, it's not true at all. It's a very big competition for legal aid.
In New York City, yes.
They really want, a lot of people, maybe they're idealistic because maybe they could make a lot more money in a private law firm, but they're very good lawyers.
Yeah, but that's in this area here, they're starving for legal aid attorneys, and they don't have enough money or enough space to have enough attorneys. And there's this, I mean, because
Yeah.
you do fundraising. I mean,
Really?
legal aid's a
I didn't know
not-for-profit.
that. I
So-
thought this government's
No,
supposed to
not at
fund
all.
them.
No,
Yeah.
it's
even
fundraising,
know
and
that.
they don't have enough money. So around here, they're very picky as to which cases they take. The Legal Aid
Oh,
Society is
you
very
like that? I
picky.
didn't even know that.
I know from
It
personal
depends.
experience.
Yeah, it could be. It
yeah.
depends on the grant. It's funded through, they do a lot of fundraising, but it's also sort of a patchwork of grants that have different requirements for
Yes.
what kind of cases you can take.
But
So
again, grants are fundraising. I mean, it's
Yeah.
still a matter of filling out a form and asking for money, and it's not a line item in a budget.
yeah,
in a
yeah.
city or county or state budget.
But I can tell you, I mean, there are fantastic lawyers at the
No,
Legal Aid
there
Society
are.
of
No,
Eastern New York. Yeah, they do great work.
I've experienced a lot of very competent and worthwhile attorneys. I just think that you just get a little too restrictive because of the time and energy that it takes for these cases, and you have one person who manages the caseload and assigns everything to these other attorneys, and they just see the big picture and they see, well, no, this isn't. There are more people who've come across our desk, or in our office, who are more worthy, who have a bigger problem than this person, even though this person feels that they're just as important as the other one. But you got to make decisions, and that's what happens, and I understand that. So, you can't represent everyone, and you can't help everyone. But
Yeah, well, they absolutely try. I know I handled, I think, 160 or so cases in a given year. So, I was able to help a lot of people there, and
No,
that was a great thing
but
about
there's
working
still a huge,
Oh yeah,
a lot more people that need help, and you can only do so much. So I'm not saying you have a light caseload, but also the Affordable Housing Partnership on Orange Street is also another place that people can go get help for their assistance.
Mark, I think we're out of time, but it was
Okay.
very good
Yeah, it was good talking.
interview over here. You enlightened me over here. I know for sure a lot of things I didn't know was happening.
Well,
or
I don't want to see
inspection.
any more X's on buildings, and I don't want to see. I want to see nice-looking buildings, because this city really has a problem, a housing problem. And these buildings were built, the homes were built for a different era, and you don't have, you really don't have the accommodations in this city of Albany that you have in the suburbs. And that's why people are moving out to the suburbs, because they have built homes that they can build.
You can't just knock down
I have
houses.
blocks and blocks I could show you where they could just simply knock down these homes. And I'll tell you, on your website, you must have hundreds of buildings that are listed on your website that should just totally be knocked down on certain blocks. They're vacated. They're designated as demolished already. I mean, you have a very informative website.
Oh, the vacant building report? Is that?
Yeah, the vacant building
Yeah.
report, as of October 31. So I just wanted you to, I mean, there's a lot that can be done and needs to be done in the city in order to get our population back and people paying taxes. And you need good homes, and we don't have that here.
Yeah. Well, that's why, my focus is always on identifying those fixes that are going to become major problems later. And what I like to think, a good example of this is we're doing one of those residential occupancy permit inspections. We see a leak in the roof. We make the owner aware of it. The owner fixes it. It's, maybe a couple $100s to do the fix. And that prevents a situation where in 20 years, you're spending $40,000 to demolish it. So that's what, that's always been my focus. And then at the same time, facilitating rehabilitation a lot of those beautiful old buildings that we have in our city.
Yes.
Making it easier to get permits, making the market more accessible for developers, making it more accessible for, individuals through something like the land bank to actually step in, own their own home instead of, renting. And that's how I think you turn that.
All right, thank you very
situation
much. We're out of time, but it was very enlightening. So continue your good work and be with success.
Yes, continued success. It was great having you.
Yeah,
Thank
great
you.
having you.